So Animaniacs returns this week after a long time as a highly touted Hulu streaming series, making it possibly the biggest event ever in terms of Generation Z nostalgia for Generation X millennial nostalgia, for what was itself boomer nostalgia for ancient cartoons that the animators of the 1940s and 50s who'd made the cartoons boomers were actually nostalgic for had been themselves nostalgic for when working.
So no, I've gone cross-eyed.
Anyway, it was a funny show that a ton of people both my age and about a generation or so younger than me have blanketed YouTube with about the same 12 especially funny, mainly song-based clips of. It spun off into the perhaps more single-focus series Pinky and the Brain, and is generally more remembered as the locus of the Spielberg Presents Golden Age era of Kids WB network daytime afternoon animation, even though Tiny Toon Adventures basically came first, and everyone is pretty excited it's coming back, so now I'm going to be the contrarian asshole and ask if people aren't setting themselves up as some kind of disappointment here.
But why?
Not that I expect it won't be good, unlike the first time around where this was just another network cartoon with a season order that had to meet commercial expectations and compete for eyeballs of actual children with alternating projects like the Disney Afternoon and Power Rangers. This is a prestige reboot project aimed, let's face it, mainly at people in their 30s who remember the original, looking to drive up streaming subscriptions in an era where online fan communities means people know voice actors and animation showrunners by name and have real expectations attached to it. This is a big deal. They've already renewed the thing for 2 seasons right out of the gate. It would be fairly shocking if it wasn't at least decent, and it feels like a foregone conclusion that whatever they come up with is going to land solidly, especially since they made sure to bring Pinky and the Brain out with them right up front.
You said you're bringing back Pinky and the Brain?
Mm-mm. Say it again. We're bringing back Pinky and the Brain.
Oh, put your head between your knees.
What I mean is that it feels also like one of the safer bets in a while in terms of these nostalgic comeback properties to, while not necessarily landing and being not good or even no longer relevant, simply remind even the most fervent fan why certain things have a shelf life of exactly how long they lasted in the first place, or why they live better in memory than they do when revived. My clearest experiential example of this was working in electronics and home video retail. Yes, I'm old, everybody laugh, I certainly do.
We are so old.
Yeah.
At the height of the first DVD boom, when the compact size of digital media storage meant every TV show ever got its season-by-season box sets, and everyone was excited to buy up the entire run of their favorite show so they could watch the whole thing, and then found out episodic TV wasn't really designed for that. It didn't make it less good, just designed for a different version of the medium in a different era. And for me, the red flag when it comes to rebooting something like Animaniacs is that the main focus, apart from, as mentioned, also reviving Pinky and the Brain, i.e. the one other part of the ensemble series that got popular enough to become its own narrative thing, the focus thus far has been on reviving the main trio themselves, i.e. Wacko, Yakko, and Dot, who, at least as far as I was concerned, were always sort of the least of their own series, which, if you've only ever seen it in clips and pieces online, was a 30-minute ensemble show comprised of multiple short subjects featuring a rotating set of sketches with their own individual casts and scenarios: the Good Feathers, Slappy Squirrel, Buttons and Mindy, Rita and Runt, Chicken Boo, etc., and of course Pinky and the Brain, of which the Warners were ostensibly the featured players, but hardly always the main course, and as the series itself went on, seemed to function more and more as interstitial MCs and recurring connective tissue than the central reason anyone was showing up. Your mileage may vary, of course. Some of that was perhaps inevitable and almost by design. It's not surprising that while designed in terms of their backstory to suggest slapstick, physical comedy-oriented characters of the early black and white animated short, the Warner's best remembered bits from the original series were always wordplay, puns, dialogue-driven gags, and especially the song numbers, or that they may ultimately have been better hosts than stars. That might just be what you get when your featured trio is comprised of 3 of the top cartoon voice actors to ever do the job, working under a bunch of hard-push TV writers with a mandate to get the stuff on TV and just do whatever so long as it's funny and holds kids' attention. And also, speaking of backstory, the whole entire point of the Warner siblings is that they weren't actually good characters in the first place, or at least they weren't supposed to be. Remember? Because I feel like that gets lost in the noise on this property. Like, 75% of the joke here is that the Warner brothers and the Warner sister are supposed to be bad, one-note, annoying characters. That's the premise of their whole imaginary backstory. What if Warner brothers, in an imaginary alt-universe quasi-Roger Rabbit situation, had tried to create a Mickey Mouse-alike property of their own named for the studio, but the characters and cartoons were bad, so they hid them away and then they escaped in the 90s.
1930, the Warner Brothers studio. Artists toiled endlessly to come up with cartoon stars, ultimately creating 3 new characters: the Warner Brothers and their sister Dot.
Hello, nurse.
The Warner's films, which made absolutely no sense, were locked away in the studio vault, never to be released. As for the Warners themselves, they were locked away in the studio WATERTOWER, also never to be released.
And yeah, that's a cute setup, but it's also sort of limited, which is why even on the original Animaniacs, the shorts actually playing it out, i.e. the Warners being psychoanalyzed, hitting on the nurse, running from the security guard, and messing with the studio head, quickly got moved aside for more general Marx Brothers style situational anarchy, song parodies, etc., and apparently the new series isn't even bringing back plots the studio head at all. Now, that's not to say there's no material here. Part of what made the series feel different from its peers in the 90s was being a kids show that engaged, however gently, with the swirl of then contemporary culture around it, and there's been a lot of stuff gone down between then and now, both silly and not so, for the writers and actors to feast on, both in meta, what we missed sense, and here's a fun new angle sense, although even there, the double-edged sword to just how influential Animaniacs turned out to have been is that, I mean, let's face it, we haven't exactly been hurting for cartoons making jokes about the rest of popular culture over the last 20 years. Hell, we haven't even been hurting for cartoons specifically voiced by Rob Paulson, Tress MacNeille, and Jess Harnell making fun of popular culture over the last 20 years. On the other hand, there's a ton of tremendously talented people working on this, both veterans and newcomers, and it's obvious the comeback means a lot to a lot of people. So it's not so much that I'm worried it's not going to work, as, well, I know a lot of people are hoping this feels like a return to the good old days. What I'm hoping for is that the new Animaniacs is as surprising in 2020 as the original was in 1993. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.